Hi, fifth graders. I am back to read to you chapter 7 of our book, Escape from Alcatraz. This chapter is called The Escape. So here I think maybe we'll get some details about how all this worked out. At 7:30 p.m., the prisoners moved to the front of their cells to be counted. The guard walked past the cells, and when he finished his round, everyone was accounted for. West lay in his bed in the same way his dummy would look and waited. When the guard walked past, he moved slightly to show that he was real. Once the guard was safely past, West heard a soft scraping sound behind his wall. He knew what that meant. Frank Morris was crawling out of his cell door. West waited nervously. He wasn't to escape from his cell until the roof vent was open. West knew that once he opened his door, he would not be able to patch it up well enough to fool the guards. It was a door for one-time use. If for some reason they ran into a problem and had to put off their escape, he did not want to be stuck with an obviously dug-out vent cover in his cell. As for Morris, he deftly climbed the pipes just as he had done every night over the past few weeks. J.W. and Clarence joined him. Clarence carried a waterproof sack he had fashioned in which he stashed some important items, family photos, and the names of people on the outside that he could contact for help. The three men crept behind their tent of blankets above the cell block and boosted Morris into the vent shaft. Morris climbed up, filed through the bolts on the wheel of steel, and forced it up out of the top of the shaft. It clanged onto the roof, making a heavy metallic bang that everyone inside the cell house heard, including the guard on duty, Officer A.V. Young. Young called another officer in the control center to inquire about the sound. While he was on the phone, two more metallic clangs followed, very much like the first. In the control center, Lieutenant Robert Weir turned on the paging system, which allowed him to listen via the microphones to the entire cell house. He thought the sounds came from the hospital area and sent an officer to check it out. The officer found nothing out of place. In his cell, Ellen West waited tensely to see if the guards would figure anything out with the noises. When it became clear that they had decided it was nothing, he relaxed a little. Then he heard his name. It was Morris behind his vent grill. It must have been music to West's ears. He may have smiled briefly before he got down and pushed with his feet against the grill. He expected it to come free fairly easily, but only one side popped out. He kicked again at the stuck side, but it held firm. He kicked again, and it didn't move. West's heart beat hard. He felt the one thing that had kept him going all this time, the hope for freedom, flicker. He knelt to the vent for a closer look. There was a steel bar reinforcing the grill on the stuck side. What was it doing there? None of the others had come across a reinforcing bar. In a hard whisper, Morris asked what was taking so long. West explained about the bar and asked Morris to pull from his side. Working together, the men strained as hard as they could against the stubborn bar, but it was no use. It wasn't moving. West sized up the hole he'd made from kicking out the other side. It was too small, and he would never fit. After a few seconds of thought, Morris told West he would go get J.W. and Clarence and see what they could do. And then he disappeared from the corridor. West knew that Morris would not return. The four men had made an agreement that they would not let one man put the whole mission in danger. If you couldn't do your part, you would be left behind. That was the deal that West had made, and he had no one to blame but himself. Instead of sulking about his blocked vent, West got to work. He figured he could bend the bar back and forth several times to snap it. He worked until his hands were torn and bloody. To West's surprise, Clarence Anglin did come to help him. He worked with West on the bar for a while, but they couldn't get it loose. He left West's dummy head in the corridor in case he got out. He could put it in place in his bed and catch up with the others. And then Clarence left him, just as Morris had. The trouble West had with his vent meant that they had to alter their plan. They decided to leave West's life preserver in part of a boat. They had built 4 pontoons, 2 for each boat. They took apart one of the boats and left one pontoon for West in case he got out. They would fix the remaining boat so that it had 3 pontoons and could support all 3 of them. Next, they grabbed the paddles that they fashioned out of plywood and some thin lumber they had scrounged. They left an extra one for West. They shoved all their gear up the vent shaft above them and climbed up behind it. They scurried up the vent, pushing their gear ahead of them, and then they pushed everything out onto the roof and climbed out. They left the extra pontoon, life preserver, and paddle for West inside the air vent. The men had been outside in the recreation yard, so simply breathing fresh air was not a new experience in itself. But breathing that air and feeling like free men, that was different. They filled their lungs with giant gulps of ocean air and ran across the roof toward the edge where Morris had scoped out the kitchen stove vent pipe. Lights illuminated the wall, but they knew the closest guard shack was only occupied when the kitchen was receiving supplies. The road tower also had a clear view of the cell house wall and vent pipe, but it was not manned at night. Besides, there was no other way to go. They most likely tied their boat and other gear up in twine and lowered it down to the ground, and then climbed down the pipe after it. The dock tower loomed 500 feet away, and it periodically flashed a light. The men crawled slowly along the prison wall, keeping their faces turned away so their pale skin wouldn't be reflected in the light flashes. The men ran to a 10-foot fence and climbed over it. They clipped the barbed wire at the top with homemade wire clippers. There was no time to enjoy the feeling of the soft earth beneath their feet. Pulling the gear behind them, they scrambled down through the brush to the beach. No alarm had sounded, and nobody had seen them on the roof or on the ground. Now they were out of sight of the gun tower. They were free of the prison. They knew their dummy heads would keep their escape secret until morning. At this point, they only had to worry about getting across the bay. A dense fog floated over the water as they waded out and climbed into the raft. People have argued for decades about what happened next. Did they take their raft all the way to San Francisco? Did they paddle to Angel Island, as other inmates claimed was their plan? Did they signal a boat and get picked up? Alan West continued to work on that bar in the concrete. Finally, at around 1 a.m., he broke it. As quickly as he could, he squeezed through the hole, found the dummy head, and set it in his bed. Then he was back through the hole, up the pipes, and on top of the cell block. He lifted himself into the vent shaft, where he found the pontoon that others had left for him. He climbed up to the top, pushed the pontoon out, and climbed onto the roof. And there, lying on the roof, was his life preserver. But the other men had left him. He didn't trust that he could get off the island on his own. All of his work and planning had amounted to him standing alone on the roof of Alcatraz. West climbed back into the vent shaft, down to the top of the cell block, down the ladder of pipes, and into his cell. He put the dummy head back into the corridor and climbed into bed. He was exhausted and defeated. Prisoners in nearby cells later reported that they heard him crying and complaining that the others had left him. At the end of this chapter, there's a picture, a photograph that says, "The escapees left the vent grill on the roof for investigators to find." So let me show you what that picture looks like. It's kind of hard to see. It's one of the few pictures in the book. So I think a lot from here, we're not going to know exactly what happened with the men who escaped. The next chapter, chapter 8, is called Following the Clues. So we'll see what happens next. See you soon.